Wherever I travel, I always look for Chinese restaurants. I know that not only will I get delicious Chinese food, but inside every restaurant, I will discover a personal story, a unique story of courage, survival, and hope.
Ding 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 dong ding ding dong ding dong ding dong ding ding dong ding dong ding dong ding ding dong ding dong ding dong 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 dong. Yo nunca calamba pensaba encontrar en Cuba mi ilusión, pues siempre pensaba en Shanghái, una China uní conmigo. Y después que aprendí a bailar con cubana el licosón, yo sentí una grande emoción por Cuba y sus mujeres.
¿Cuánto es este?
5 veces.
Pero nos cobraron de solo 2 para llegar acá.
Ah, bueno, igual, como quiera.
¿Cómo?
Me dijo 5.
Havana, in the middle of the
Me
summer.
dijo 5, me ha dado igual.
I've come here to look for a restaurant, perhaps run by some long-lost relatives.
Ahí.
No, ¿en dólares cuánto es?
Years ago, I was told by my grandfather that a lot of people from his village had migrated to Cuba.
Yeah, I know.
Valeria, my interpreter, and I take a taxi into Barrio Chino to look for a connection. In the early 20th century, Havana had one of the largest Chinatowns in the Americas. But the Chinese community has been depleted over time. Today, people who live in this neighborhood frequently are not aware of the rich history of the Chinese in Cuba.
Estamos en la zona china, que todos son muy buenos con nosotros.
¿A usted le gusta la comida china?
Sí, como
Como
no,
que no,
muy
deliciosa.
criolla, muy buena.
Y todo lo que cocina son muy buenos. Aparte, los chinos son buenos con los cubanos. Aparte, no tenemos quejas. Al contrario, somos hermanos.
Es muy bueno.
Los tres chinitos hacen buenas pizzas
Los
también.
tres chinitos la tiran buenísima, mira, ya $2 en dragones. Los tres chinitos de oro, la Mitin Chan.
No, yo no he comido comida china, pero sí sé que es bueno, un plato exquisito.
Me gusta mucho la espinaca, verdura, frijolito chino. Me gusta mucho el desarrollo que tiene China. Desde muchos años se desarrolla muy en todo, en la cerámica, en lo que es la cultura china. Me gusta mucho la pintura.
In the 50s, Barrio Chino was filled with pleasure seekers from the US, visiting casinos, opium dens, and the Shanghai Theater, which featured live sex shows. But the Barrio Chino I'm exploring this morning couldn't be more different from its infamous past. Now, it's a fantasia chinesca, a Chinese fantasy constructed by the Cuban government in the heart of downtown Havana. Everything is artifice and pretense. Restaurants are decorated with glowing red lanterns and plastic golden dragons. Outside, costume waiters in pigtails and coolie hats join hostesses in Chinese dresses and kung fu outfits to lure international tourists with American dollars. This Chinatown is unlike any I've experienced in other countries. Yet, in the middle of this artificial fantasia, I can find traces of the original Chinese society established in the mid-1800s. But I don't see many Chinese faces. It's almost as if the community has disappeared.
Yo me llamo Luis Chum.
¿Usted sabe de la historia de los chinos cuando llegaron acá? ¿Qué es lo que pasó?
¿Conoce la casa de los abuelos chinos? Oh, ¿quieres que lo lleve? Donde todos los abuelos chinos muy viejitos comen y viven. Ellos pueden comunicar.
Pero usted, ¿qué entiende de las historias, de la historia de los chinos? ¿Quién le contó a su padre?
Que los chinos vinieron a hacer vida a Cuba. Después vino el triunfo de la revolución y muchos chinos se fueron a Canadá, Estados Unidos, regresaron a China. Quedaron muy pocos aquí en Cuba, solo 200, 300 chinos.
Nothing is what it appears to be in Cuba. Luis Chong, who I met on the first day, turns up everywhere we go. Luis is a product of the many contradictions in Cuban society. At the moment, he's a hustler and part-time Chinatown guide, just trying to survive. I'm grateful to have met him. He opened doors for me and provides access to people's homes and their stories. Without his help, those doors would have remained closed. This morning, for example, he takes us to Long Kong Association and Casa Abuelos, the association's home for the elderly. I meet Alejandro Chiu, the president. Like all Chinese associations in Cuba, Long Kong was set up in the 19th century to take care of the needs of the community. Taking advantage of the government's recent push for tourism, associations in Barrio Chino asked for and were granted the right to open restaurants. When Alejandro takes us into his kitchen, I'm surprised that instead of the usual jam-packed space, I find bare shelves and almost empty refrigerators. Obviously, Chinese ingredients are hard to find. I'm even more shocked when I discover later that Chinese food in Cuba is unlike any I've ever eaten. It's salty and mostly deep fried. The most popular item on the menu seems to be pizza, while Chinese noodles are made with Italian spaghetti and fried rice is black with soy sauce.
我哋咁樣係做呢個咧，做福利啊，僑團福利嘅生意，佢係福利嘅工作，係咪？就唔係話諗住做生意私人辦咁樣嘅，即係呢啲人只取於社會，用翻啲社會，呢啲係我哋嘅意思係咁樣做嘅。廣東人啦，我哋南海啦，你邊度啊？我係九江係聖關嘅。聖關啊，我九江啊咩？佢有聖關啊咩？誒咩？佢有聖關啊咩？ 你好啊，兄弟！你幾俾人拉啊你啊？嚇？係俾人拉啊！我而家喺多倫，喺加拿大。喺加拿大。我30幾年。
I now experience firsthand Alejandro's generosity and community spirit. He runs an old-age home for the needy in Barrio Chino. These men and women have been left behind by history. Today is Father's Day, and I'm delighted to meet the many Kwans from my ancestral village of Gaokong. My grandfather would have been proud of me.
Tengo fe en que tú comprendas como yo lo he comprendido, que nuestro amor se ha perdido como una estrella fugaz. Acaricia mi ensueño el suave murmullo de tu suspirar. Como brilla la vida si tus ojos negros.
Femin Hui Li is the Cuban-Chinese Frank Sinatra. His parents came from China in 1902, the year that Cuba gained independence from Spain. In the 60s and 70s, Fermin used to dance the rumba and the conga along the Malecon. Now, at 67, he no longer dances, but he still sings for us at Long Kong, where he goes for lunch every day.
La noche que me quiera, desde el azul del cielo, las estrellas celosas nos mirarán pasar y un rayo misterioso hará negro en tu pelo el cielo y que verá que eres mi Ya te salió un poquito mejor, ¿no? Desde niño empecé a cantar y me gustaba el baile también. Yo estoy bailando como 42 años en los carnavales de La Habana, que es el espectáculo más grande de Cuba, en donde se concentran por lo menos 1,5 millones de personas entre participantes y actuantes. Y verdaderamente soy popularmente conocido por el público, que me pusieron hasta el nombre de el chino del carnaval.
In 1953, Alejandro Chiu was working in a Hong Kong film studio at the height of American McCarthyism and the communist witch hunt. He got into trouble when his American-controlled studio learned of his socialist ideals and fired him. He was 31 years old. Perhaps it was his destiny. 7 years after Alejandro landed in Cuba, Fidel Castro won his revolution and Cuba became communist. I just can't get over the fact that there are so few Chinese here. Despite my previous research, I found no historical references to the once vibrant Chinese society. Alejandro tells me that before the revolution, Casino Chonghua, the Chinese Benevolent Association, kept an independent record of Chinese in Cuba. I'm curious to find out who these Chinese were and how large the community was. I know they came to Cuba as early as 1847, when the Spanish imported 150,000 indentured laborers from China. More came in the early 20th century as merchants and shopkeepers. But what has happened to all their descendants? I wonder if the records of Casino Chonghua might shed some light on a story that seems to have been excised from Cuban history.
但係咧，佢唔喺中國嚟。
但係佢都會登記。
係啦。
佢都會嚟登記。I begin to realize that unlike Chinese communities everywhere else in the world, Chinese in Cuba have been assimilated. Perhaps it's true what they say. A true Cuban is 1 part Spanish, 1 part black, and 1 part Chinese. Or that 1/4 of all Cubans have a Chinese grandparent. Chinese men were indentured laborers. No women were permitted to immigrate. So it's not surprising that interracial marriages took place.
Soy yo el chino del Barrio Chino. ¿Te acuerdas de mí? Del Barrio Chino, Chino.
Traces of the Cuban-Chinese community in its heyday remain, but they're buried in the Chinese cemetery across the street from the National Cemetery.
Vamos, señor. El hombre lo que quería dejar con la cámara, le dije, no, si son mis familiares que vienen del norte, y yo tengo que dejarlo, dice, señor, no hay problema, ya. Yo pensé que iba a ser más complicado. Quiero averiguar, tenía que averiguar dónde estaría, tenía que ver el señor dónde estaría mi abuelo enterrado. Mi papá, pero mi abuelo está aquí.
Despite the fact that I could not understand a single word of the caretaker's Spanish, he is definitely one of the most memorable people I met in Havana. He tells us colorful stories of a dying community.
Yo te voy a explicar. Antiguamente, cuando la colonia china era la colonia china, ahora sigue siendo la colonia china, pero yo creo que usted me entiende. Oiga, tenía money, poder, ¿ya entiende? Tenía fuera. Todo esto lo atendían los chinos, yo tenía 9 empleados aquí. Ellos tenían 9 empleados. Y todo esto estaba lindísimo. Pero ¿qué pasa? Que los chinos, cuando con el proceso, unos se fueron yendo, otros se fueron muriendo, otros se fueron quedando, ¿oye? Y esto fue decayendo un poco.
This is the fate of those who stay. After 7 years, he tells me, these bones are taken from the earth and scrubbed clean so that they can be put into boxes for storage inside the crypts.
Avisa.
The caretaker takes me to the Kwan family crypt. I'm digging deeper into my own history. Lying all around are boxes of Kwan bones, many from my grandfather's village in China. Life is strange. I've never been back to my ancestral village, and yet, halfway across the world, I confront the ghosts of my ancestors.
Here in my house.
Luis has been insisting for days that we go with him to buy Havana cigars. And even though I don't smoke, I agree. This is how ordinary Cubans survive. Clandestine capitalism beneath the facade of state socialism. A box of Cohibas, Castro's favorite cigars, sells for $150 American on the black market. That's more money than a Cuban doctor makes in 6 months.
Y se compró su casa.
So $90 altogether? I give you $100. I return to the restaurant to say goodbye to Femin and listen to one final serenade before I go. Femin has brought a cassette tape containing songs he recorded in his prime some years ago. Suddenly, I'm in a time warp, in this decaying restaurant, frozen in another era. Shanghai, perhaps, in the 50s, full of history, full of memories. I'm filled with sadness. Wonton, Kung Fu, lion dances. Cubans are trying so hard to recreate Chinese culture. And everyone's an actor, playing a part for tourists. In the government-run Bar Peking, we find Marissa Cook and Abel Lam, two Chinese Cubans cast in the roles of bartender and cook. They're perfect for the part.
Cuando se hizo este restaurante, los requisitos que pedían era que, es decir, el principal era que todo el mundo debería de ser descendiente de chino y debería de rasgos chinos, ¿no? Y entonces cuando alguien viene aquí o llama por teléfono, me hace favor con la china o me hace favor con el chino, todo el mundo se queda, todo el mundo es chino, tiene que decir nombre, si no, también le dicen china, a todos nos dicen chino. Todos por aquí le dicen chino a todo el mundo, ¿entiendes? Es muy normal, es muy natural en Cuba que a cualquier persona que tenga rasgo chino ya le dicen chino.
We follow the music to Café de Paris, a tourist bar where you can sip a rum mojito and dance to live Cuban music. Here we run into Ming, who is also an actor, and his kind of Chineseness appears everywhere in this free, floating fantasy world.
I'm the wizard, I'm the first Cuban-Chinese tropical fortune teller. I Ching is very famous, very well known at Cuba. Yes, absolutely yes. Special for our countrymen, for Chinese in the whole world.
Further down the road, I meet Roberto Lee. Roberto's only Chinese heritage was his maternal grandmother. That was good enough for the Cuban government, and he was sent to study martial arts in China. He returned after 1 year, fluent in Mandarin and a Kung Fu master. Now, a few years later, he's a big star in Fantasía Chinesca.
Las costumbres de los chinos son muy distintas a las nuestras y el idioma también se hizo muy complejo, los tonos, cómo entender, la gramática también. Los profesores chinos son muy exigentes y entonces trasladar eso a Cuba me ha costado mucho trabajo por las características de los cubanos, ¿no? Siendo yo cubano, en ocasiones me siento chino en cuanto a este problema del entrenamiento, la seriedad, la perseverancia.
Perseverance and maybe fate have kept Alejandro Chiu in Cuba. I asked him what he did after the revolution.
咁同佢做好多嘢㗎我，係咪？咁咧，佢政府咧亦好相信我嘅，有好多人識得我，係咪？因為一個中國人唔係幾多中國人就咁樣做啫咯，因為普通嗰啲中國人啊，走曬或者唔走咧，又唔同佢冇咩嘅，係咪？即係冇聯絡啊，即係冇咩，即係唔係同情佢嘅，咁所以咁樣啊。
It was fascination, I know, seeing you alone with the moonlight.
My trip to Havana comes to an end. Luis has found his grandfather's tomb. Alejandro has made a place for himself in Castro's Cuba. And Fermin has given me the cassette tape of his songs to enjoy back home. These are precious memories and reminders of a way of life, born of another era, frozen in time.
Fascination, I know, seeing you alone with the moonlight above. Then I touch your hands and acknowledge I kiss you. Fascination turn